Hello everybody, welcome to this Talking Tendons podcast. My name is Associate Professor Peter Meliaris. I am an academic at Monash University. Today I wanted to talk about a new study that was published very recently in the journal. I'm just trying to find the journal and I can't. I'll come back to that. But the lead author is Ruth Chibensi, who's out of Iowa in the US. And there's a whole bunch of really good co-authors. I would strongly recommend you read this paper. It is a very high quality randomised controlled trial with some really interesting findings. It's published in Pain. So back to the paper. What they did in this paper is, so the title is The Effects of Pain Science Education plus Exercise on Pain and Function in Chronic Achilles Tendinopathy, a blinded, placebo-controlled, explanatory, randomised trial. So they've really nailed that title. They've defined what type of design it is. It's explanatory because it has a placebo control. They're trying to understand the mechanisms. They're trying to understand, whether this works and how it works, and you can see that from the range of outcomes they've used. It's definitely not pragmatic because they've got so many outcomes and a lot of lab-based outcomes, but really, really good explanatory trial. So basically they'll try and understand whether if you add this pain science education, which is understanding pain mechanisms, understanding biopsychosocial aspects of pain, will that improve over the placebo, which was a pathoanatomical education for pain, and they had exercise in both groups. So that was their design. They ended up recruiting 66 people, randomizing into those two groups, and they, as I said, they had a whole host of outcomes. The rationale was basically that we know that pain science education, biopsychosocial education, may be beneficial for musculoskeletal pain. It might work via reducing fear, reducing catastrophizing, but we don't really know that. It might work via reducing or influencing pain mechanisms. We don't really know whether that's the case either. So they basically tested it, and they had a whole range of really good outcomes, which I will try and find now. The outcomes were pain and function, as you would imagine. Movement evoked pain. They had things like calf raised pain. They had self-reported pain. They had kinesiophobia. They also had performance measures, which were sort of calf raises and other metrics, and they had CPM, conditioned pain modulation, so whether sort of inhibitory mechanisms are changing, inhibitory pain mechanisms, central inhibitory pain mechanisms are changing. They had that's probably the main ones. I probably left out a couple, but have it, as I say, have a read of the paper. And they looked at people doing these interventions, and again, the interventions are really well described. They've got even videos, links to videos which you can access. So have a look at that. Basically, going to the bottom line, what did they find? Effectively, they found that these two groups pretty much went through the interventions, did pretty well, adhered to them pretty well. There wasn't too many issues, but there wasn't any differences really between the two education types. There wasn't any differences in the primary outcomes, or I believe any of the other outcomes in the education type. So whether you had the exercise with the pain science, biopsychosocial education, or whether you had the other education, you still improved. And it's really interesting because they found improvements, pretty good improvements in pain, as you would imagine, but they also found improvements in psychosocial factors like kinesiophobia, but they improved equally, or there was no difference they detected in those improvements between the groups. Possibly people weren't. One of the explanations that I've sort of thought of is that maybe people weren't the type of people who had major fear issues who you would target towards this approach. So maybe there is sort of a subgrouping that is needed, people who are not going to respond to, unless they have that targeted education. Maybe that's one of the explanations. Another explanation that the authors talk about is that, well, it could just be that, people are having exercise, they're gaining confidence because it's like a graded exposure intervention, as we know. So they mentioned that in their first paragraph of the discussion. So, you're having exercise, you're getting more confident, you can tolerate load. So maybe the additional biopsychosocial education is not adding anything further above that. Maybe it will, as I say, for some people, but not in the cohort that they looked at in this trial. They did do, sort of to poo-poo my explanation of maybe you need to target the right people. They did do a post hoc type analyses of just the ones that had high kinesiophobia, and they found in each group, and they found no differences. But we know that because you're breaking randomization, those analyses, you have to be very cautious in the interpretation of those analyses. So look, one of the other interesting things was CPM didn't change. Now again, it could be because CPM wasn't impaired to start with, so the inhibitory mechanisms were not impaired to start with. So one of the things to really look at is the cohort, whether it would be a cohort that would have CPM and kinesiophobia initially. Maybe that affects, and what they would have found in this trial would have been different. But I think it's a great trial, and it's definitely worth reading. What it basically tells us is that people will get better. Maybe pain science education is not the answer, particularly for this cohort. We do need, what it tells me, I think, and what I'm really interested in from this is what are the mechanisms by which people improve kinesiophobia, because they clearly do improve. What are the mechanisms, though, by which they improve? That would be really interesting to untangle. So that's all I wanted to say about that one. I'll link it to the show notes. It's a really good trial. It's really well reported. It's really well written. So if you're interested in trials and reading a good one on tendinopathy, that's one to read. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.